Okay, so we're looking at literal equations. Literal equations are equations that have several pronumerals. So you can see in these examples here lots of different letters A, X, B, D, C, etc. Solving literal equations involves changing the subject of the equation to a particular pronumeral. So in the first two examples, we're asked to change the subject of these two equations to X. In other words, it wants the answer to be X is equal to something or other. So we need to get the X on its own. So let's look at example A. AX squared plus BD is equal to C. So we want to get the X on its own. So we need to move onto the right hand side all the other things. So how do I cancel this off this side? If I add BD, if I then subtract BD, that cancels. So I need to subtract BD from this side. So I'm left with AX squared is equal to C subtract BD. Okay, I need to get the A off the left hand side. If I divide this by A, my A's cancel. So I need to divide my right hand side by A. So that leaves me with X squared is equal to C minus BD over A. I'm asked to solve for X, so not X squared. So if I take the square root of this side, square root and square cancels, and that's okay as long as I take the square root of the right hand side. And just remember, when you take the square root of something, you have got two solutions, the positive solution and the negative solution. So let's look at our next example. Again, we are asked to solve for X. So in other words, we want the answer X is equal to something or other. So if it's got an X, I need it on the left hand side. So I'm going to subtract CX from here, because then that cancels and gets it off that side, moved over to this side. So I've got AX subtract CX is equal to B. Two terms with X. What I then do is factorise. They both have X as a common factor, and then I'm left with A subtract C is equal to B. If I divide this by A minus C, subtract C, sorry, that cancels. So I divide this side by A subtract C. So my answer is X is equal to B over A subtract C. One more example. Now this time we are asked to make B the subject. So it wants an answer B is equal to something or other. So let's look at how we do this one. So it says D is equal to the square root of B squared minus 4AC. The first thing I'm going to do is get rid of the square root sign. So if I square all of this, the square root and the squared, inverse operations, they cancel each other. So I squared this side, so I need to square this side. Remember, whatever you do to one side, you must do to the other. So D squared is equal to B squared subtract 4AC. I'm just going to write this the other way around because I always like my subject to be on the left hand side. So all I've done is simply switched the sides. I'm wanting B on its own. So if I add 4AC here, they cancel. So I need to add 4AC here. So I've got B squared is equal to D squared plus 4AC. Remember, I want B as the subject. So I'm going to take the square root of this side, because then square root and squared cancel and leaves me just with B, which is what I want. I've just taken the square root of this side, and that's okay as long as I take the square root of the right hand side. So b is equal to d squared plus 4ac, and just remember when you take the square root of something, there is always a positive and negative solution.